So good morning, Stephen, for taking time out. I know you're busy, and I know you've got some plans of moving your offices in COVID of all places. So good luck with that. Look, first time I came across you, Stephen, was through the NED Awards. And I must concede, as someone who's sat on a few boards, I didn't realise there was such an award ceremony out there. And when I got involved in it, I thought, wow, this is really, really good. So for those who don't know, firstly, perhaps you can explain who you are, the firm you work for, and how Peel Hunt got involved in, and what are the NED Awards. So over to you, Stephen.
Sure. So I'm Stephen Fine. I'm Chief Executive of Peel Hunt. Peel Hunt is a UK-focused specialist investment bank, and our main area of focus is on UK public and private companies. We act as a retained corporate advisor to 153 public companies. We write and publish research on some 400 UK-listed public companies, and we have strong links to corporates through the advisory, through institutions, through our sales and research product, and actually direct to retail through intermediaries through our market making, trading and execution. So we have a very comprehensive joined up picture of the UK public market space, the shareholder space and the retail space, which allows us to have what I would say quite superior client information. As a consequence of that, we're dealing with boards all the time, and whether that's chairs, SIDs or general non-execs, we're coming into contact with them all the time. And what we found some 14 years ago now was actually the opportunity to start an award to recognise governance, oversight, stewardship, best practice was actually missing. And could we do it in an effective fashion where we could properly and appropriately reward or recognise those who had contributed something quite special in those key areas?
So how did you first find, when you set up in 2006, how did people react to you when you said...
Well, if I'm candid, in 2006, the world was very different. This was pre the GFC, global financial crisis. And to be honest, I found that the awards were actually nothing special. It was an opportunity for a few people to get together. NEDs at the time were sort of seen to be nodding dogs, where the execs made the decisions and non-execs just sort of blessed them. Yeah. And the awards were really frequented by a lot of, please don't take this the wrong way, whichever audience is listening, lawyers and accountants and PR would show up to the awards, have a drink, have something to eat, clap for whoever it was that won something and disappear off into the ether. And so it was what it was, and those were different times. But I think the key change occurred after the financial crisis, where myself and at the time Dominic O'Connell, who was the editor of the business section of the Sunday Times, sat together and thought, actually, we've got something pretty interesting here. And we decided to completely revamp and go out and look for a new section of sponsors who we felt could help us take these awards onto the next level. And I suppose the key thing here is to use the word perspectives. And perspectives is quite an interesting word. And what we did was we looked for sponsors that would have a different perspective on the role of a non-exec. So we weren't looking for a single bank or a single law firm or a consultancy firm to come in and be an overall sponsor of these awards. We were looking for a collection of organisations that all had something slightly different and perhaps a bit unique to bring to the table to help us sift through this wide spectrum of non-executives and really help judge who would be the most appropriate that we should recognise from those that were nominated. And that meant we had an asset management company, and then we had an accountancy firm and a law firm and a consultancy firm. And then we had a business school, and then we had women on boards, and then we had the Non-Exec Director Association, and the list went on and on. And each of those would have a slightly different perspective on what a non-exec should be and how they should operate and how they should be seen. And that was then supplemented. So all of the sponsors would have a role as a judge, and that was then supplemented by additional judges who themselves would have a slightly different perspective on what makes a good non-exec and how we should reward best practice and governance, oversight and stewardship. And that then led to a far greater focus on diversity and inclusion, so we could be very broad about what we did and how we did things.
So how did you pick these judges then? Who are they, and how did you decide somebody makes a good judge?
It's difficult. It's how do you decide whether somebody makes a good non-exec and how somebody become a good judge, and how somebody a good football manager. I mean, everybody has their own ideas, and we live in a world where everybody can manage a football team and judge a contest and then be a judge on an NED awards ceremony. But I think the key is that a diverse group of individuals sitting around a table can actually outperform expert matters in any area. There's been academic research written on that anyway, but I think it's really important. As long as you get the diversity right, and that can be past winners, that can be the sponsors that have those different perspectives, that can be individuals from the public sector rather than the private sector. That can be individuals from, even we had Francis O'Grady as a judge from the trade union movement. So you get a different perspective, and that is really important. I think that goes to the heart of what we're trying to do here. This is not a reward or recognition just because you have a first past the post measure of voting. So, the person with the largest number of votes does not win. If you're nominated, it's quite a complex process and it's a very, very thorough process. And maybe I can just explain that because some people don't quite appreciate just how rigorous it actually is.
It is very rigorous.
So we launched it in the Sunday Times. The nomination process is open for a couple of months, and we encourage people to nominate those people who they believe have done a good job. And that's a short form. So please write down who it is, what they've done, and why they merit it. That goes in. Those short forms are then collected by representatives from the Cranfield and Henley Business School. And we then contact the chief exec of each of the nominated companies and create a long form. And the long form could be some 1,000, 1,500 words, answering all sorts of questions as to what has that individual done and why do they merit inclusion on this list. So the chief exec of the company for the person who has been nominated is contacted and helps fill out that long form. Those long forms are then sorted and sifted by Henley and Cranfield Business School, and they create a short list of 6 potential winners with a couple of reserves. Those 6 winners or nominated shortlist candidates are then put into a judging pack per category, and they are sent to all of the judges. The sponsor of each of those categories then will contact each of the 6 nominated individuals on that shortlist and interview them themselves. So you have the short form nomination, you have the long form nomination by the chief exec, you have the sorting and sifting by Cranfield and Henley Business School, you then have the separate interview by the sponsor of that category, and then you have the judge's dinner. And at the judge's dinner, that sponsor of that category will then present the 6 candidates to the broader 17 judges that sit around the table. Then there is healthy debate, who, which, what, where, when, why, how. And then each judge has 50 points. And those 50 points can all go to one individual, or it can be 40, 10, 0, or it can be 20, 20, 10, however it might be. They're folded up, go to the chairman of the judging panel, and then those points are tallied up, and then you receive a winner. So it is a very complex, rigorous, structured means of finding the right person that genuinely does deserve the accolade in that particular category. And I think the one thing that I'm probably most proud of is that winners of these awards genuinely feel they have won something quite special. And I think that's a really good reflection on the hard work and effort that we put into ensuring that the process is rigorous. It is, tough. It's not easy to win this category. And that's why I think people appreciate the fact that they genuinely won something a bit special.
You spoke about that back in 2006. It was quite tough to get people on board. And of course, you read the financial press, and certainly the role of the NED has become really important in terms of governance. So what do you think has changed? How much has it changed since you've sort of, been looking at these awards? How has the role of the non-exec really changed? Has it really changed dramatically?
Look, I think a consequence of the global financial crisis was almost an extraordinary focus on regulation. And when you focus on regulation, there has to then be accountability. And when you've got accountability, it's not just on the execs, it becomes a board issue. And if the board are then accountable, and it comes down to, whether it's personal liability or collective liability, however you want to look at it, if there is accountability, you have to take these things very, very seriously. Now, this builds up, and there have always been strong non-execs, always been good shares and great non-execs, even before the financial crisis. But I think since then, it's been almost a quantum leap in terms of focus on what a non-exec actually does, how they operate, and what they bring to the table.
And I think that's been reflected from what I can see in the kind of candidates now being put forward for the awards. It's just, some of them are amazing people. So you can start seeing that the right kind of people are now being attracted. Look, we're now we're in the middle of a pandemic. The role of the NED is probably more important than ever because of the changing environment, the very fast-paced environment. What do you think NEDs will have to face now between now and the next 5 years? Do you see the role of a NED changing over the next 5 years? Do you think, bearing in mind where they've come over the last 15 years, do you see more dramatic change?
Well, look, the concept of challenge is nothing new, but actually I think it's going to become a tougher environment for execs in which to operate in the way they traditionally did. And probably one of the best examples I can give is the pandemic highlighted very clearly companies' over-reliance on debt. And we've grown up on a debt binge pretty much for the last 10, 15 years with ever declining interest rates and the ease of which you can raise debt. And I think the pandemic suddenly highlighted that you could be on the board of a company that can suddenly have zero revenue for a reasonably large number of months. And when you go from operating, it's tragic, hospitality, casual dining, travel and leisure, entertainment industry, where you've actually had businesses physically closed. And if you're on the board of those companies, you're going to sit there and think, okay, look, we've managed to restructure our debt if you've been able to. And actually banks and government have been quite willing and been very helpful. So we've restructured the situation we're in, and we're either in reasonable or difficult or whatever shape we might be. But the chances of this happening again are significantly higher if they've happened once than they ever were before. So the chances of you sitting on the board of a company where you've got revenue for 4 months were almost minuscule, infinitesimally small. But the fact that it happened March, April, May, June, the fact that it happened once means the likelihood of it happening again goes up. So therefore, as a board, are you going to sit there and think to ourselves, right, we've restructured our debt, we're in reasonably good financial shape, et cetera, but would we rather have more equity in 5 years' time than debt that we have now? I imagine the answer to that is probably yes, depending on where you are, debt to EBITDA, et cetera. So I think the focus of non-execs is probably going to shift slightly to how is the business run and how is the balance sheet structured, much more so than it ever has been in the past. And, historically, we've talked about diversity and inclusion, and we've talked about remuneration, and we've talked about all of these issues. But actually, I think there'll be a bit more of a shift towards the business itself and the challenge to the execs on how that business is structured, whether it's balance sheet, etc. Perhaps more so than it has been in the past. And again, I also, let's be clear, I'm not saying that any regulatory issues are going to subside. If anything, I think they're probably going to increase over time as well. So actually, the accountability and the onus put on the non-execs, I think, is actually going to increase substantially from here, not just regulatorily, not just operationally, but business focus as well.
I think people are also looking now towards the non-execs, almost from a societal perspective, because look, let's face it, corporate has been littered with failures. The corporate, we were going to talk about Thomas Cook. The Germans had their Wirecard. In this neck of the woods, the West Midlands, we had Carillion, FTSE 250 company. And I think almost you need now boards that, I completely agree, need a mix of those who are financially probing between equity and debt. But equally, I think, and it'd be interesting what you think, you need a board that now understands change and innovation, because we are facing now an uncertain future, a future that I think that will always be fast changing. So what are your views on that? What should a board look like? Those sort of contradictory, the risk versus the finance side?
I mean, look, culture and conduct have been huge areas of focus from the regulator. And again, they are seen to be part of the root cause of many issues in companies. The new buzzword coming from the regulator right now is this focus on operational resilience. And again, I think that's a consequence of the COVID pandemic as well. And operational resilience covers a whole host of issues. There's almost no issue in which a company operates that isn't covered by operational resilience. So I think to understand that concept, to be on top of that concept, link that in with the culture of a firm as well, I think are going to be very, very important. And you can scroll back to Wirecard and Carillion, I mean, where there were genuine concerns. I mean, Thomas Cook was just a difficult business, overburdened with debt, etc. Goes back to the point I made earlier. But I think the onus on non-execs to be on top of a broader suite of their knowledge base and operational understanding. The traditional view that there's the big tower block, which is the company, and once a quarter this helicopter arrives and lands on the roof, and the non-execs come out to the top floor only and stay there for half a day and then get back in the helicopter and go off, and they never see what else goes on, I think is gone. You have to know what's happening. There's a walk the floor, understand the people, what's going on here. That's a very different concept to what we've seen before. And there are many that want to do that. There are many that want to do that, but never really have had the opportunity to. But I think there's going to be more of a push for that. But really, Linda, to your question, I kind of analogize to the way we've structured the judging panel of the awards themselves. It's very diverse. It's not just gender, but it's age, it's ethnic background, it's sexuality, it's background of work and operations, it's public versus private, it's any number of criteria that fit in, and that creates a phenomenal sense of debate and thought and questioning and challenge and understanding. And I do believe, by and large, it gets you to the right result. Now, whether boards adopt something along those lines is to be seen. But I think if you compare our judging panel now to where it was in 2006, it's chalk and cheese.
You spoke about operational resilience. I take that on board. Traditionally, the views of the external world to a NED was that they were there to represent the investors, the shareholders. And so therefore, the only thing they ever thought about was bottom line, dividends, and making sure that the shareholders are properly represented. I mean, that was the traditional role of a NED. But people now look at NEDs, understanding, as you said, the wider stakeholder. And this pandemic has sort of seen society in a different way. Do you think going forward now then, a NED has to be not just looking after investors, not just looking at, are you operationally resilient?
Yeah.
And almost picking your point about the diversity of the board, actually has to always look at the wider stakeholder, because they are now talking about a wider stakeholder engagement rather than the narrow, are we turning the money over as we're supposed to, and are we all getting their dividends?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the NEDs are there really to protect all stakeholders. If you go back to sort of the pre-global financial crisis, it was really more to support the growth of revenues or profits or whatever it was for the company. But over the last 13, 14 years, it has broadened much more to include all stakeholders, including staff. So it's not just, and customers and clients, as well as investors. So I think the important thing there is, again, it's the diversity of, I suppose, oversight that the NED has to have to all aspects of the business.
Questions, then I'll let you go. I know you're a busy chap, but one of your awards is the NED to watch. The Dame Helen Alexander NED to watch. So perhaps you could let those who don't know, who was Dame Helen Alexander, and what's so special about this particular award that you make a special mention?
So one of the most coveted roles in the NED Awards is actually the chairman of the judging panel. And again, I've been incredibly fortunate to work with people like Sir John Parker, people like Sir Roger Carr, and then Dame Helen Alexander, and now we have Paul Drexler. And Dame Helen, again, founder of the Helen Alexander Review on diversity, was a real force for good. And she came in to chair the judging panel, and sadly, Dame Helen passed away. And we thought it appropriate to recognise her and the contribution she's made nationwide to the concept of diversity by giving an award in her name. And we felt that the NED to watch would reflect her contribution appropriately, because it's all about those that are up and coming, those that are also forces for good and forces for change, and understand the changing dynamics and the concepts that affect boardrooms. And it's actually been a really interesting award to watch it grow and flourish. And the quality of the nominees has been outstanding, because it's not for somebody that's been around for a long period of time. It's actually those that have done something quite special in a relatively short period of time, or have moved from exec to a non-exec role, or even just started in a non-exec role, where they really understand the concept of challenge to the board. So I'm delighted that we have that award, and I think it is very good recognition for the wonderful person that Dame Helen actually was.
Just a couple of observations before we look at the process and finish off. It's interesting, as you said, back in 2005, 2006, the NEDs were sort of in the background. They were more of a stewardship function, making sure investors are looked after. Their role has widened. I think the problem that we had with RBS up north and all the cases we now spoke about means now that the NEDs are now right on the front pages now. They can't disappear behind. And then I think they do bring an incredible set of skills. So I think this is a brilliant and well thought out awards sort of ceremony, or a category you want to call it, for NEDs. And I think this particularly, you're right, we also need to encourage new NEDs to come on board. So just a very quick one before we talk about the closing dates and the nominations. In your eyes, what makes a good NED in your eyes? What does a NED bring? Because if a chief exec is brilliant at what they do, other than making sure the numbers are right, why would they need a NED? What does a NED bring? What sort of skill set do they bring to a board that a chief exec wouldn't have?
It's just wrapped up in that word challenge. Why? Explain that to me. I don't quite understand that. Can you just run through what that means? An inherent curiosity, I think, is really important. So, I need to understand this better, because, my neck is on the block here as well, and I've got shared accountability with you. So you need to explain to me why we're doing this and what it means. And, it seems too easy. It seems too good to be true. What's happening here? What about if this happens? What about if that happens? And getting comfortable and understanding that is so important as a very straightforward, to use the cliche, a check and balance. It is a check and balance. And unfortunately, unchecked executives can actually get consumed with their own self-importance and do things they shouldn't be doing. So governance, oversight, stewardship, best practice, understanding your regulatory obligations, living up to your regulatory obligations, having a best-in-class infrastructure that can support regulatory scrutiny or external scrutiny are really important. And very often an exec will get way too focused on the growth of the business and not look at the infrastructure required to support that growth.
So how do you nominate?
Go to nedawards.com and there'll be a nomination short form on there that you can fill out. There are repeated reminders each week in the Sunday Times. We're posting a lot on social media, particularly LinkedIn, which will tell you exactly what to do and how to do it. The key thing here is nominate people that you genuinely believe deserve recognition because they've contributed something special, good in the world of governance and best practice.
Well, Stephen, look, you've been fantastic. Thank you very much for explaining not just the ceremony, but what a NED does and the kind of impact I think NEDs are having. I think business has taken a battering reputationally over the years, but I think the NEDs are now coming into play and making sure that we find a rebalance. I think society is now looking towards NEDs to make sure that businesses are, as you said, operationally resilient, because employees have got mortgages to pay. The whole economy relies on that circular income.
Yep.
Wealth creation is so important. And I think you cannot, and I think well done to you, you cannot just assume that NEDs are just, they are now a lot more prevalent and a lot more central to decision making. So look, I'm just going to let you go. I know you've got plenty of things to do, and you may even have a potential office move to organize in these pandemic days. So good luck with that. And thanks very much. And hopefully in the time left between now and the closing date, hopefully we'll encourage people, one, to understand what a NED does. Secondly, to put themselves forward as NEDs for potential future. And thirdly, if you know a NED has done a superb job out there, get nominating.
Get nominating. Get nominating. Go through your Rolodex, check everything that you think is appropriate, and nominate those individuals that you really do believe deserve that recognition, because these awards, that's what they're there for.
Fantastic, Stephen. Listen, I'm off to have a cup of tea. I don't know about you.
Thank you, Nick. Great chatting to you as always.
Absolutely, Stephen. Listen, thanks very much for your time, and have a great day and a great week.
You too. Take care.
Cheers.